With the ocean making up 71% of the Earth's surface, it comes as no surprise that ghost ships would have their fair share of mysteries that are left unsolved. These theories of what happened to these ships can be anywhere from foul play to natural disasters and explosions, even the idea of the supernatural. Many of the most common theories that pertain to ghost ships could include mutiny, piracy, insurance fraud, human error, or natural water disasters, such as sea quakes and water sprouts. One of the most eerie ghost ships is the Octavius, a vessel that was determined to be lost in the Arctic for 13 years, and only to be found once before being left to the ice and never seen again. In 1761, the Octavius was sailing back from China and was destined for British shores. The captain decided to sail through the Northwest Passage. At the time, a voyage across had never been accomplished. This had been the last anyone had heard of the Octavius. In 1775, the Herald, working in the waters of Greenland, noticed a sailing ship that seemed to be weather-beaten. The Herald decided to search the vessel, only to find the deck deserted. The men from the Herald broke open the ship's hatch to search down below, only to come face to face with the sight of the entire 28-man crew frozen to death. In the captain's cabin, the captain himself had been frozen at his desk, pen in hand, and with the ship's logbook open in front of him. In the cabin was also a woman with a young boy wrapped in a blanket frozen in the bunk. The men of the Herald became terrified and grabbed the logbook before taking off. Because of the frozen pages, the only ones that survived were the first and last few. Once the book was taken back to the captain of the Herald, they were able to determine what had happened during the part of the voyage. The captain of the Octavius had attempted to navigate through the Northwest Passage, but the ship had become trapped in ice and the entire crew perished. The last recorded position of the Octavius was 75 north, 160 west, placing the ship 250 miles from north of Barrow, Alaska. Since the Octavius was found off the coast of Greenland, it's safe to assume that the ship had broken free and completed its voyage through the passage, and then met the Herald on the other side. The crew of the Herald believed that the ship was cursed and left it adrift. Since then, the Octavius has never been seen again. It's obvious in this story what happened. The crew was unable to navigate the passage, became stuck, and then froze to death. The only reason for the captain having decided to take the passage was that the weather was unusually warm. But why would a captain decide to take a passage that had never been successfully completed before? Why would he continue with the decision when a woman and child had been on board? And what happened to the Octavius after the Herald left it? Ships are tiny vessels in the large ocean. With such a vast, unexplored area, the history of a ship can be lost before anyone knows it was there. This is the case for the Orang Meiden, with not only a confusing timeline, but also the very existence of the ship being questioned. May 1947. Vessels that had been passing through the shipping route in the Strait of Malacca near Indonesia reported desperate voices coming through their communication channels. The earliest story of the SS Orang Meiden dates to 1948 by writer Wynne Brooks. According to Brooks, the ship was a 40-year-old, 5,000-ton cargo steamer ship. The Meiden carried 23 crew members, including the captain. What the ship was carrying and where it was headed was lost from any accounts. Brooks replayed his story, saying that an SOS message was received from an officer's radio stating, "SOS from Orang Meiden. We float. All officers, including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole of crew dead." A few confused dots and dashes of Morse code later, 2 words came through clearly. They were, "I die." After having received the distress calls from rescuers, the Silver Star, a ship passing through, headed towards the call. The crew boarded the Meiden a day later after finding the ship no longer moving and with no steam coming from the smokestacks. But the ship seemed to be undamaged. Crew members of the Silver Star attempted to call out for anyone on board. The Meiden to only be met with silence. The crew climbed aboard and were met with chilling sights of dead bodies of the crew. The radio officer, who presumably called for help, was still by the radio. Although none of the crew seemed to be physically injured, they did not go peacefully. Their postures were convulsed and their expressions twisted. Not long after the crew members of the Silver Star had boarded a smokestack of the Meiden had caught fire, and the ship was rocked by a total of 4 explosions. Engulfed in flames, the Orang Meiden sank to the ocean floor, taking the only evidence of what happened to the ship and its crew. The first and most concerning details of the Meiden story is that the ship was never registered with Lloyd Shipping, which kept records of ships. Meiden also refers to Sumatarian Island, where the ship may have been registered. Others believe the Meiden was a Dutch ship that was commandeered by Indonesian pirates who proceeded to ferry illicit cargo and would therefore have every reason to avoid being documented. The earliest British reports of the Meiden's fate were actually logged in 1940. In these accounts, the distress call was similar, but the Meiden's radio operator soon abandoned a request for medical help and demanded a warship to come assist them. A British merchant ship responded and found roughly 12 dead bodies. It is possible, one officer said, that there were more crew members, but the imminent explosion forced them to abandon the search. In this telling, the crew didn't possess any frozen faces of terror, and requests for a warship may have implied an attack by pirates. But the Meiden was found with 1 lifeboat missing. According to Brooks, the story of the Meiden grew to involve speculation that there had been 1 survivor. After rowing away from the catastrophe, he was found alive on a Pacific island, where he told occupants that 2 gases had accidentally been mixed together to create a deadly toxic cloud. He was warned not to abandon ship, ignored it, and reached safety. He lived long enough to restate his tale and then died as a result of either chemical inhalation or time adrift at sea. The most common speculation of what happened to the ship is that the ship had been subject to some kind of gas or chemical leak that had seen its crew members overcome, possibly a release of fumes after a rocky time at sea jostled their cargo. According to these theories, seawater could have entered the ship's hold, reacting to the cargo to release toxic gases, which then caused the crew to succumb to asphyxia and/or poisoning, after the seawater would have reacted to the nitroglycerin, causing the reported fire and explosion. The Mary Celeste, a ship that what happened to its crew and the captain's reasoning for abandoning ship is still a mystery. December 5th, 1872, 400 miles east of the coast of Azores, the British brig Tigrida spied a ship adrift the choppy seas. Captain David Morehouse recognized the ship to be the Mary Celeste, a ship that had left for New York 8 days before him and should have already reached its destination, Genoa, Italy. Captain Morehouse changed course to help the ship. Upon boarding the ship, the crew realized that the Mary Celeste was deserted. Below decks, ship charts were thrown about and the crew's belongings were still in their quarters. The ship's only lifeboat had been missing and the 2 pumps had been disabled. 3.5 feet of water was slushing around in the ship's bottom. Although the cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol was largely intact, there was a 6-month supply of food and water. The theories of what happened to the Mary Celeste ranged from pirates to mutiny and to waterspouts. The ship began its fateful voyage on November 7, 1872, sailing with 7 crewmen and the captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs and his wife Sarah and their daughter Sophia, who was only 2 years old. The 282-ton Brigantine battled heavy weather for 2 weeks to reach Azores, where the ship's log's last entry was recorded at 5 a.m. on November 25th. After spotting the Mary Celeste 10 days later, the De Grida crewmen sailed the ship some 800 miles to Gibraltar, where a British Vice Admiralty court convened a salvage hearing, which was usually limited to determining whether the salvagers, in this case the De Grida crewmen, were entitled to payment from the ship's insurers. At this point, it could be considered that the fact that a captain would most likely order a ship abandoned within sight of land. Since Santa Maria was the last land for hundreds of miles, it seemed safe to assume that the Mary Celeste had been abandoned the morning of November 25th, after the last log entry was written. Captain Briggs wrote that he saw nothing unusual about the voyage until the last 5 days, which is why he transcribed the ship's log starting 5 days from the end. The ship's log is believed to have been lost in 1885. Anne McGregor, a documentarian, discovered that Briggs was actually 120 miles west of where he thought he was, probably because of an inaccurate chronometer. By the captain's calculations, he should have sighted land 3 days earlier than he did. The night before the last entry in the ship's log, the Mary Celeste again faced rough seas and winds of more than 35 knots. Still, McGregor reasons rough seas and a faulty chronometer wouldn't, by themselves, prompt an experienced captain to abandon ship. Coal dust and construction derbies could have fouled the ship's pumps, which would explain the disenabled pump found on the Mary Celeste. With the pump inoperative, Briggs would not have known how much seawater was in his ship's hull, which was too fully packed for him to measure visually. At this point, says McGregor, Briggs, having come through rough weather, having finally and benevolently sighted land, and having no way of determining whether his ship would sink, might well have issued an order to abandon ship. But where the crew, captain, his wife, and daughter went is a mystery. It would be safe to assume that the sea overtook the lifeboat and claimed the lives of the people on board.